a bathtub filled with blood, Rita's body, pale and still, baby Harrison wailing on the bathroom floor, sitting in a lake of red that mirrors the night Dexter was born in blood. This isn't just a tragic ending to season 4. It is Dexter Morgan's future, finally catching up to him. Cut back. Trinity on the kill table. Plastic wrap, knives, the familiar ritual Dexter believes he controls. As Dexter stares into Arthur Mitchell's terrified face, the series quietly locks these two images together. Trinity's body in Dexter's world, and Dexter's family in Trinity's. The man on the table is not just another target. He is the mirror Dexter refuses to look into. Throughout his life, Dexter has believed in a simple story. Harry's code will guide his urges to kill. The dark passenger can be managed, contained, even weaponized against other killers. Trinity appears to be the perfect opposite. A family man who kills women in bathtubs, a religious volunteer hiding a decades-long ritual of murder. But the core thesis of this video is different. Trinity isn't Dexter's opposite or his ultimate villain. He is Dexter's future, the version of himself he is desperate not to recognize. Let's kick things off with a rapid-fire montage that season 4 quietly builds. Dexter copying Arthur's breakfast routine, standing in the Mitchell kitchen, watching this man flip pancakes for his family with practiced ease. Dexter spying through windows as Arthur hugs his children, taking notes on how a killer can still be a husband and father. Arthur baptizing Dexter in the church, literally submerging him in holy water, as Dexter searches for a way to sanctify his double life. Then finally, Rita's death in that bathtub. The show is not only escalating the plot, it is drawing a straight visual line between these men. This would be the start of a season-long experiment for Dexter. Instead of hunting Trinity as just another monster, he studies him as a mentor, convinced there's a way to balance family, work, and killing without consequences. Yet, even as the parallels pile up, Dexter clings to the belief that Harry's code makes him fundamentally different, that his victims deserve their fate, while Arthur's are innocent. The question at the heart of this essay is simple but brutal. How can Dexter spend an entire season living in Trinity's shadow and still fail to see what is right in front of him? And what does that denial cost everyone around him? In this video, we're going to dive deep into season 4 as a psychological autopsy of Dexter's denial. We will track specific scenes, recurring imagery, and the character arc entire year, hunting that reflection without ever truly recognizing his own face. So let's kick things off with the scope. This is not a full recap of Dexter as a series, and it is not even a complete walkthrough of season 4. Major beats that do not intersect with the mirror between these two killers will be minimized. Case of the Week investigations at Miami Metro, office politics, and subplots that never touch Dexter's double life will appear only when they illuminate the central question. How does a man who kills in ritual denial fail to see himself in the man who kills in ritual worship? Within that frame, the analysis rests on 4 main pillars. First, Trinity's family man facade versus Dexter's. Arthur Mitchell survives for decades as a beloved church volunteer, husband, and father, while secretly amassing hundreds of victims. Dexter watches this and believes he is seeing a successful version of his own double life, a model for how to keep a wife, children, and a dark passenger all under one roof. Second, their competing codes. Arthur's religious cycle of mother, sister, father versus Harry's code of evidence, preparation, and never getting caught. Third, the evolution of Dexter's denial. Throughout his life, Dexter has explained his urges as an external force, a passenger riding along. Season 4 pushes that mythology to its breaking point, as Dexter tries to learn from Trinity, imitate him, and then erase him, all while insisting that their differences are fundamental rather than cosmetic. Finally, the fallout. How this denial culminates in Rita's death, an event that changed not just Dexter's life, but the entire meaning of Harry's code. To keep that focus sharp, some exclusions are important. Deborah's career arcs, Batista and Lagerta's relationship, and most peripheral cases will be mentioned only when they press against the Dexter-Trinity mirror. Dexter. New blood will not be fully unpacked here. It will appear as a lens on Trinity's legacy, especially in how Harrison inherits the consequences of his father's choices rather than the clarity of any code. Structurally, early sections will build the mirror piece by piece: origin trauma, ritual, and family. We will move chronologically through Trinity's revealed backstory and Dexter's response to it, showing how each discovery tightens the reflection. Middle sections will track Dexter's season-long self-deception, from stalking Trinity as a mentor to sabotaging his own chance to walk away. Later sections will unpack the thematic aftermath, examining what Trinity reveals about the lie of the dark passenger and the long-term effects of Dexter's refused feed his. But when we're going to dive deep into Season 4, that tidy opposition falls apart, because Trinity isn't Dexter's inverse. He is the answer to Dexter's most dangerous question. Throughout his life, Dexter has been told a story: manage the urges, obey the code, and a normal life is still possible. Marriage, kids, a backyard, barbecue schedule, balanced with a kill schedule. Season 4 is where that fantasy becomes explicit. Dexter is not just asking whether he can keep killing without getting caught. He is asking, can he have it all? Can a serial killer also be a loving husband and father without the two worlds colliding in blood? Let's kick things off with how Dexter approaches Arthur. He does not stalk Trinity the way he stalks other targets. He stalks him like a mentor. Dexter follows Arthur home, watches the church volunteer, the husband at the breakfast table, the father leading prayers. He is stunned that this man has maintained a decades-long double life, hundreds of victims, and still has a family that, on the surface, believes in him. Dexter literally moves into Arthur's orbit, joins his charity build, studies how he compartmentalizes. This is the most disturbing part. Dexter envies him. Trinity represents a version of the future where the killing never stops, yet the domestic image remains intact. The long-term effects of Harry's code are playing out right in front of Dexter, and he calls it a success story instead of a warning. The show hides that mirror in plain sight by first letting Lundy define Trinity as an almost supernatural predator, a ghost who appears every few years, kills 3 victims in a ritual, and vanishes. That mythology lets Dexter treat Arthur as a professional challenge, a legend to outsmart, not a man whose home life might resemble his own. Only later do we see the cramped Mitchell house, the terrified wife, the abused son and daughter. The domestic reality is exactly what Dexter refuses to connect to his own kitchen table. By the time Dexter discovers that Arthur's ritual is built on childhood trauma, on reenacting his mother's suicide, his sister's death, and his father's abuse, the parallel becomes unavoidable. 2 boys, born in blood, each building a private religion around killing. One calls it a dark passenger. The other calls it God's punishment. In the next sections, we're going to dive deep into those origins, because the mirror between Dexter and Trinity doesn't begin with Rita's bathtub. It begins in childhood. In the stories, both men tell themselves about what that blood means and what it gives them permission to do. Both origin stories begin the same way. A small boy in blood, staring at a nightmare that will never end. The difference is not when Dexter tapes a victim to a table. He is both reliving and rewriting that night, turning helplessness into control, turning trauma into procedure. Arthur Mitchell's beginning is less industrial, but just as surgical in its precision. As revealed in Season 4, young Arthur spies on his sister in the bathroom. She slips, crashes through the glass shower door, and dies naked and bleeding on the floor. His mother, unable to bear the loss, later jumps to her death from a height. His father responds, not with comfort, but with rage and abuse. In a single chain of events, sister, mother, and father are shattered, each role becoming a wound rather than a shelter. Arthur's adult cycle is that childhood replayed on loop. A young woman is killed in a bathtub, a direct mirror of his sister's bloody death. A mother figure is forced to jump, echoing his mother's suicide. A father figure is bludgeoned, reenacting the violence of his own father. Where Dexter builds one container and one table, Trinity builds a 3-part liturgy. Each set of victims is not random. They are placeholders for the family he lost. The codes each man adopts grow straight out of that blood. Harry's code tells Dexter the dark passenger is real, but can be aimed. Kill only those who deserve it. Never get caught. Make the urges serve a purpose. The narrative is half merciful, half damning. Dexter is not asked to heal. He is asked to channel. Arthur, without a Harry, becomes his own priest. He discovers a religious framework that recasts his compulsion as atonement, convincing himself that God demands these sacrifices, even as he recreates his own suffering. This is where the mirror thesis locks in. Both are boys, frozen in a moment of blood, building adult identities around not processing that moment honestly. Dexter cannot afford to see that Arthur's story is his own, with a different wallpaper, because that would mean the code is not salvation, just decoration. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how Dexter's pursuit of Trinity shifts from hunter to student, and why trying to learn from this reflection becomes the most catastrophic choice of his life. Harry's code and Arthur's faith look completely different on the surface, but underneath, they do the same quiet work. They turn murder into a manageable habit. Let's kick things off with Harry's rules, because throughout his life, Dexter treats them as sacred law. Only kill those who deserve it. Never get caught. Blend in. Make the dark passenger useful. Harry takes Dexter's urges and wraps them in procedure, from plastic on the walls to blood slide trophies, selling the idea that this channeling and cleansing. His confessions in the church are not about stopping. They are about resetting his internal ledger so he can keep going. In his mind, every kill is penance and order. The ritual, the prayer, the tears afterward, these are his version of plastic wrap and blood slides. They turn ongoing violence into something he can narrate as obedience instead of compulsion. Just like Dexter, Arthur has discovered that if the story is strong enough, the conscience goes quiet. Both codes are myths of control. Dexter believes he is different because his victims are bad people. Arthur believes he is different because his murders are framed as divine structure, not random brutality. One hides behind forensics and justice, the other behind scripture and sacrifice. But both are elaborate excuses to avoid saying the simple sentence, "I like to kill, and I choose to keep doing it." Dexter initially looks at Arthur's faith as pure delusion. The hymns, the church volunteer work, the crying at the altar, he reads it as hypocrisy. What he does not see is that Harry's code is just as constructed, just as tailored to make murder feel necessary and righteous. This would be the start of Dexter's most dangerous blind spot, believing his narrative is truth while everyone else's is a lie. And underneath that judgment is something even more unsettling. Dexter is drawn to Arthur, not only as a target, but as a template. Trinity has taken the same basic lie, "I can manage this forever," and stretched it across decades of family life, faith, and hidden bodies without consequences. Yet, in the next section, we're going to dive deep into how that envy quietly turns Dexter from hunter into apprentice, and why chasing that fantasy of control leads directly to the destruction of his own home. Dexter doesn't just see an enemy in Trinity. He sees a completed fantasy, the life Dexter is racing to assemble in Season 4. Arthur Mitchell has already been living for 30 years. Let's kick things off with Arthur's public persona. On the surface, he is the model church elder, the man who leads prayer circles with a soft voice and wet eyes. He organizes school assemblies about grief, renovates his own home on weekends, and spends his free time with a Christian charity building houses for the needy. At church, children hug him, parishioners trust him, and pastors defer to him as a pillar of faith and family. In every visible arena of his life, Arthur is the man Harry always wanted Dexter to pretend to be. Now, contrast that with Dexter at the start of Season 4. He has the suburban house, the white picket fence, the new baby, and a marriage to Rita that is still settling into a routine. His job at Miami Metro memorized. In those moments, Dexter isn't just hunting Trinity, he is studying him. He wants to steal the blueprint, to learn how to stretch a career of killing across an entire lifetime without the collapse Harry always warned him about. Lundy's estimate that Trinity has been active for more than 30 years doesn't just terrify Dexter, it seduces him. Here's proof that the dark passenger can be fed in secret while the public self ages into a grandfatherly saint. But that aspirational gaze has consequences. Because Dexter wants the fantasy Arthur represents, he refuses to see the cracks in the facade. He walks past the terror in Jonah's eyes, the way Sally flinches, the oppressive silence in the Mitchell home. Every warning sign that Trinity's family life is built on control and abuse becomes background noise to Dexter's obsession with the how of not getting caught. This would be the start of a fatal blindness, and in the next section, we're going to dive deep into how those ignored red flags lead directly to an event that changed Dexter's life forever. That fatal blindness meets its perfect amplifier when Frank Lundy walks back into Miami Metro and gives Trinity a legend. Lundy does not just present a suspect. He unveils a ghost story. For decades, he explains, a single killer has moved across the country, leaving the same 3-part ritual behind. A bludgeoned man in a bathtub, a woman forced to jump to her death, and a young woman drained in a bathtub. No deviations, no mistakes. Perfect cycles every few years, stretching back 30 seasons of killing. By the time Lundy is done, Trinity is not a man. He is an urban legend with a pulse. Lundy's slideshow turns crime scene photos into religious icons. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated his own kills as a sacrament of the code, but here he watches another priest of death at work. The language is mythic. Hundreds of victims, 30 years, never even a viable suspect. The message is clear. This is not just another predator. This is the predator. The audience is primed to see Trinity as almost supernatural, a pure manifestation of killing urges without any ordinary life attached. Dexter responds exactly the way that framing invites. He is not horrified. He is thrilled. While Deb and Lundy feel the weight of hundreds of victims, Dexter hears a promise. It is possible to kill for decades and never be caught. Trinity becomes the living proof of Dexter's private fantasy of longevity and invincibility. This is what the dark passenger could be if it were never constrained by Harry, never questioned, never forced to confront. The easier it is for Dexter to miss the most important truth. Arthur is already living the exact life Dexter is trying to construct. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into what happens when that legend finally collides with the reality of Arthur's domestic world, and how that collision becomes an event that changed Dexter's life forever. That collision finally happens in a deceptively quiet moment. No kill room, no plastic, just a mall, an elevator, and a grandfather helping a child wash his hands. After all the ominous files, crime scene photos, and Lundy's warning about a phantom who's been killing for 3 decades, Dexter's first clear look at Arthur Mitchell is almost disappointingly ordinary. Let's kick things off with the visual shock. Dexter tracks Trinity through the crowd, expecting a hulking predator, the terrifying legend Lundy described. Instead, the camera lands on a thin, slightly hunched older man, carefully guiding a little boy toward the sink. Arthur's voice is soft. His manner is patient. He jokes gently with the child. The staging is deliberate. The so-called perfect serial killer is introduced not in shadow, but under fluorescent lights, framed as a harmless grandfather. The long-term effects of that choice are huge, because it immediately destabilizes Dexter's entire mental model of what a monster should look like. Throughout his life, Dexter has relied on contrast. The dark passenger is violent. Dexter's public face is controlled, boyish, unthreatening. Lundy's profile of Trinity supports that split. A towering myth, a relentless reaper with hundreds of victims. But when Dexter finally watches Arthur in public, that contrast collapses. Trinity looks closer to a fragile retiree than a brutal ritual killer. The gap between appearance and reality doesn't relax Dexter. It fascinates him. Dexter's internal narration locks onto this contradiction. He notes the kindness, the care, the grandfatherly warmth, and almost immediately starts framing it as technique. This must be camouflage. This must be part of the act. In that moment, the script quietly exposes Dexter's blind spot. He never applies the same suspicion to his own performance as a gentle coworker, a loving partner, a playful stepfather. The very explanation he uses to decode Arthur is the explanation that, if turned inward, would reveal the truth about his own life. Visually, the episode leans into that parallel. Dexter watches from a distance, the camera cutting between his young, clean-cut face and Arthur's lined, fragile features. Neither looks dangerous. Both are established killers. The contrast between Arthur's frail body and following Arthur Mitchell across state lines, Dexter reframes the hunt as a field trip, a chance to audit the life of a man who has been killing for decades while still tucking his kids into bed. Let's kick things off with the most telling detail. Dexter has Trinity on his table more than once in this season, metaphorically speaking, and walks away. Instead of rushing to kill, he watches. He tracks Arthur to the charity build, to the school, to the family breakfast table. Each new scene is processed through an internal monologue that sounds less like a predator assessing a threat and more like a student evaluating a syllabus. Arthur, in Dexter's mind, has figured it out. He has solved the equation Dexter keeps failing: how to indulge the dark passenger, obey a code of secrecy, and still present as a loving husband and father. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated Harry as the architect of his existence, the man who discovered his urges and built the code around them. But in these episodes, Harry's ghost becomes background noise, while Arthur's living example takes center stage. Dexter's voiceover shifts. Instead of asking, "How do I stop him?" the questions become, "How does he do it?" The emphasis is on balance, on longevity, on the long-term effects of living this double life without the collapse Dexter secretly fears. We're going to dive deep into those surveillance sequences because they invert the usual rhythm of the show. Dexter watches Arthur in the bathroom, preparing a kill, noting the ritualistic precision. He studies the way Arthur talks to his victims, the calm, almost pastoral cadence, as if confession is part of the murder. Then, in the very next beat, Dexter watches him at the dinner table, passing the potatoes, leading grace. The same hands that push a woman to her death gently fix his daughter's hair. Dexter is not planning angles of attack here. He is taking mental notes, building a curriculum for his imagined future as a family man who still kills. This would be the start of a subtle but crucial role reversal. In most seasons, Dexter casts others as apprentices or pawns, whether it is Miguel Prado, Lila, or later, Zach Hamilton. Here, the dynamic flips. Dexter positions himself as the apprentice, shadowing a master who has supposedly perfected the balance he craves. He tells himself he is in control, that he is only delaying the kill to extract more information. But the more emotionally invested he becomes in Arthur as mentor, the more he needs the fantasy that Arthur is different from him in all the right ways. Because if Trinity really has cracked the code, then Dexter's life can still work. If Trinity is just Dexter with 3 extra decades of consequences, the entire illusion collapses. The next cracks in that illusion, gaining a cover. He seems to enjoy it. The banter feels practiced but effortless, a ritual as polished as his kills. The blocking underlines that. Arthur at the head of the table, hands open, body relaxed, his dark passenger apparently tamed by routine and prayer. Then the show cuts to Dexter's house and the copy begins. Same basic angle, same table layout, same dad at the head trying to project ease. Only now the performance creaks. Dexter throws out a joke that lands flat. He over-enunciates his enthusiasm. The pauses stretch half a beat too long. Rita and the kids don't laugh so much as blink, recalibrating to the suddenly animated version of the man who usually stays quiet, distant, and distracted. This is where we're going to dive deep into the idea of borrowed masks. Dexter isn't naturally this person. He is reciting lines he watched in Arthur's kitchen. Even his gestures echo Arthur's, leaning forward on his elbows, reaching out to touch a shoulder, making eye contact a fraction too intensely. The parallel framing turns the scene into a visual equation. Arthur's side of the split screen is the template. Dexter's side is the glitchy reproduction. The psychological danger hides in that aspiration. Up to this point, Dexter has treated other killers as either prey or problems to solve. Trinity is different. Trinity becomes a mentor fantasy, a living proof of concept that the urges, the code, and the family can all coexist for decades without consequences. The mirror stops being a warning and becomes a goal. If Arthur is a functioning version of Dexter's life, then admitting Arthur is a monster would mean admitting that Dexter's own dream is monstrous too. Pattern interrupt. Notice what Dexter does not question. He doesn't ask whether this easygoing dad energy is real for Arthur's family. He only asks how to import it into his own home. As Dexter gets closer to the Mitchells, the fractures in Arthur's performance will start to show. Fear in Sally's eyes, Jonah's anger, Rebecca's silence. But Dexter will fight to keep those cracks compartmentalized. Anything else would force him to turn that same scrutiny on Rita, on Astor and Cody, and on the hollow center of his own carefully staged breakfast table. That denial will be the bridge to the next stage of their connection. When Dexter stops copying the performance and starts stepping directly into Arthur's family role, with consequences none of his victims ever saw coming. That bridge is crossed the first time Dexter steps over the Mitchell family's threshold. On the surface, it looks like everything he claims to want: a warm suburban home. Kids, the compartmentalization becomes obvious. Dexter thinks in categories: family Arthur, killer Arthur, mentor Arthur. When he notices Sally's brittle smile or Jonah's panicked deference, he briefly wonders about Arthur's temper, then pivots back to the lesson he believes he is there to absorb: how to kill and still keep a family. The truth is staring him in the face, but acknowledging it would mean admitting that the same dark passenger he carries into Rita's kitchen could turn their home into a mirror of this one. Sound design drives that point home, even when Dexter refuses to. Raised voices bleed through closed doors as he waits in the hallway. A muffled thud, a choked-off sob, then silence. The camera lingers on a cracked doorframe, on a dented wall behind a coat rack, on a bruise peeking out from Sally's sleeve as she pours coffee. Dexter notices. His eyes flick there. His narration labels it as family drama, an unfortunate side effect of Arthur's stress, not the direct consequence of the same violence Dexter ritualizes on his tables. We're going to dive deep into how that denial functions as self-protection. This would be the start of Dexter consciously editing reality to preserve the fantasy that his own code keeps everyone safe. If Trinity's domestic terror is just a quirk of personality, then Dexter can still believe his victims stay neatly outside his home. The long-term effects of that belief are catastrophic. In this moment, though, the first big choice is simple. He turns away from the mirror, and in doing so, clears the path for what happens when he finally steps into Arthur's role, instead of just observing it. Dexter, turning away from Arthur as a mirror clears the stage for someone else to walk into frame. Jonah Mitchell, the son being trained to become the next Trinity, while Dexter watches from the sidelines. This is where we're going to dive deep into how sons are shaped by monsters, and how Dexter quietly refuses to admit he belongs in that category too. Let's kick things off with Jonah's introduction. On the surface, he is the classic awkward teenage son in a religious suburban family, but Arthur's parenting is a slow motion horror show. From forced smiles at breakfast to Arthur's sudden explosions of rage, Jonah lives in a house where fear is the air. That fear crystallizes in the hunting trip, when Arthur drags Jonah into the woods and turns a father-son outing into an initiation rite. Arthur frames it as tradition, a rite of passage. He pushes a rifle into Jonah's hands, corners a deer, and demands the kill. Jonah is shaking, horrified, begging not to do it. Arthur doesn't care about life or about his son's terror. He cares about obedience. For him, this is training. Teaching Jonah recognizes trauma, but not its reflection. After all, Dexter had his own first-time moments. Harry supervising the early kills, testing the dark passenger, refining methods so the victims would always be the guilty. Dexter feels something unusual around Jonah. Sympathy, protectiveness, even a flicker of guilt. He steps in, comforts him, and frames Jonah as a victim of Arthur's brutality. That part is true. What Dexter will not allow himself to consider is that Jonah is also a version of himself, raised under a code that just happens to be religious instead of forensic. If Harry had been more like Arthur on the surface and less like a cop, the line between training and torture would have been impossible to ignore. Jonah's eventual rebellion, when he fights back against Arthur's legacy instead of inheriting it, quietly opens a door. It suggests a path where a son can reject the narrative imposed on his urges and choices. The long-term effects of that possibility are enormous, because it hints that Dexter could confront Harry's role, reject the code, and stop killing. But taking that path would require admitting that he is closer to Arthur than to Harry's idealized image, and that his victims are not just the guilty, they are collateral in a life built on denial. The question is whether Dexter will ever be brave enough to open that door, and what has to break before he even tries. If Trinity is the mirror Dexter refuses to look into, Sally Mitchell is the reflection Rita never gets the chance to fully see. The show quietly builds this parallel in kitchens and living rooms, not in kill rooms, and that domestic focus is where we're going to dive deep. Let's kick things off with Sally. On the surface, she is the quintessential supportive church wife, soft-spoken, always hosting, always smiling. When Dexter first meets her at the Mitchell home, she instantly starts smoothing over Arthur's sharp edges, explaining his moods as stress, praising his charity work, and turning every awkward silence into a joke about how busy he is with the church. Sally's entire life has been reorganized around absorbing Arthur's darkness, so the world never has to see it. That dynamic lands harder once it is placed next to Rita. Throughout his life with Rita, Dexter benefits from a similar shield. Rita spends seasons rationalizing his late nights, secretive behavior, and emotional distance as the pressures of forensic work or the lingering trauma of his childhood. When Dexter disappears, Rita tells friends he is at the station. When he zones out, she worries he is tired, not that his dark passenger is planned work. He deploys charm and vulnerability, learned under Harry's code, to redirect her anger into concern. The emotional control is quieter than Arthur's rages, but the outcome is similar. The wife doubts her instincts and returns to the curated narrative. This would be the start of a devastating implication. The series is not only contrasting two killers, it is mapping two marriages on the same trajectory. If Arthur represents an event that changed Dexter's understanding of what a double life can do, Sally represents the end state of Rita's path. The long-term effects of decades with someone like Arthur are right in front of Dexter, a woman who has normalized terror so thoroughly that she calls it love. The show is quietly telling us that if Dexter keeps following Arthur's path, Rita will become Sally. And that is exactly the future Dexter refuses to imagine, even as he stands in Sally's kitchen, studying Arthur and pretending the consequences at home will somehow be different. And that denial goes even deeper than Sally's bruises or Rita's forced smiles. It lives in the language Dexter and Arthur use to explain why they kill and who exactly is doing the killing. Throughout his life, Dexter has described his homicidal urges as a passenger, an extra presence riding along inside him. The dark passenger is not just a metaphor, it is a full narrative device he leans on to survive his own reflection. Dexter tells himself the passenger wakes up, the passenger wants blood, the passenger chooses victims. Dexter, in this story, is just the driver trying to follow Harry's code and keep that presence pointed at the right targets. Let's kick things off with how often Dexter talks about this entity as if it is genuinely separate. When he watches other killers, he compares passengers, almost like trading notes at a convention for monsters. The language creates distance. The urge is external. The knife is guided by something he did not ask for. The kill is an accommodation to an inner hitchhiker that will never get off the ride. That framing lets him believe there is a good Dexter managing a dangerous other, rather than one person making a continuous chain of choices. Arthur Mitchell does the same maneuver, but with stained glass and hymns instead of blood slides. He constantly invokes God, the Holy Spirit, and divine purpose as the forces moving through him. Arthur's ritual is rigid, almost liturgical. The rooftop jumper, the bathtub, the burial. Each act is explained as obedience. God wants this. The Spirit leads him. The suffering is holy because it echoes his own childhood trauma, turning his victims into unwilling stand-ins in a private sacrament. We're going to dive deep into how that language functions. When Arthur prays before a kill, his family, not just in a warehouse or on a stranger's plastic. The protector fantasy fails, the code fails, and the dark passenger suddenly looks less like a separate rider and more like Dexter's own hands on the steering wheel, driving everyone he loves toward an event that changed his life forever. The long-term effects of that realization will reshape how others discover the truth about Dexter and how much longer the passenger story can hold. That fantasy of control shatters most violently in a place designed for surrender, a church, a congregation, and at the center of it all, Arthur Mitchell lowering Dexter Morgan into holy water. Let's kick things off with the surface of the scene. Dexter has infiltrated Trinity's life under the alias Kyle Butler, posing as a lost soul seeking guidance. Arthur, the respected church volunteer and family man, invites him to a public baptism. In front of Arthur's friends, his family, and his God, he places his hands on Dexter's back, speaks the ritual words, and dunks him beneath the water. The crowd sees redemption. What actually happens is a serial killer being ceremonially welcomed by another serial killer. Throughout his life, Dexter has framed his darkness as an accident of trauma and a burden Harry helped him manage. Here, Trinity offers a different narrative. The baptism is not about control, it is about acceptance. A man who has been killing for decades, hiding behind charity and religion, symbolically rebirths Dexter into his world. This is not Harry's code. This is Arthur's gospel, where the dark passenger is not denied but sanctified. The layered symbolism is brutal. Two men who kill, both pretending to be redeemed family men, stand in a house of worship, rehearsing a ritual of cleansing. Dexter, covered so often in the blood of his victims, now disappears under clear water, as if the show is inverting his origin story. The shipping container was his baptism in blood. The church is his baptism in denial, an event that changed how he understands what a double life can look like. Visually, the series leans into this echo. Close-ups on Arthur's face, calm and almost tender. Close-ups on Dexter's expression, eyes searching, almost in awe. The camera lingers on the water, streaming off his head, on the cross looming above the congregation. On the way, Arthur's hands guide him down and pull him back up. It feels like a perverse mirror of Harry, guiding Dexter through his first kill. Only now the blessing comes from a man who has long since abandoned any pretense of moral limits. Dexter's emotional reaction is key. He is not repulsed. He is moved. For a moment, the long can edit it. Instead of ending the cycle, he decides to improve it, as if a decades-long pattern of murder is just a process problem waiting for a smarter engineer. Let's kick things off with the moment Dexter first interferes. After tracking Arthur through his next sequence, Dexter sabotages the planned father kill in the house frame, pulling the intended victim out at the last second and replacing him with himself as the target. He loosens bolts, disrupts the timing, and turns what should have been a lethal fall into a staged accident that spares the man's life. On the surface, it looks heroic, a killer saved, a ritual broken. But the truth is more dangerous. Dexter is not trying to stop Arthur. He is trying to redirect him. Throughout his life, Dexter has believed in Harry's code as a way to channel his urges without shutting them down. Here, that logic mutates. He convinces himself he can both keep Trinity alive long enough to study him and quietly limit the damage in the background. Arthur will still kill, just less, more carefully, under supervision. This is Dexter, playing God with someone who already plays God with victims. Arthur decides who dies to complete his trauma ritual. Dexter decides which of those deaths are allowed, while he harvests insights about balancing family and murder. The pattern interrupt here is subtle but chilling. The supposed hunter becomes a project manager of another man's killing spree. We're going to dive deep into what that says about Dexter's dark passenger. By tinkering with Trinity's cycle instead of ending it, Dexter reveals a belief that his own compulsion is adjustable. Like a dial, he can turn up or down. He watches Arthur's meticulous staging and thinks in terms of dosage. A little less brutality here. A delayed victim there. The code becomes less a moral line and more a calibration tool. The consequences arrive almost immediately. Arthur, sensing that his pattern is being disrupted, grows unstable and paranoid. The failed father kill does not remove a death from the ledger, it displaces it. Arthur lashes out in less controlled ways, threatening strangers, terrorizing his own family, and ultimately targeting new victims Dexter did not anticipate. The more Dexter interferes without eliminating him, the more chaotic Arthur becomes. This would be the start of a feedback loop that Dexter cannot admit he created. By refusing to end Trinity's life when he has the chance, Dexter extends the killing career of a man with hundreds of victims already. The long-term effects of that arrogance are written in blood, Rita's, but also the unnamed lives lost while Dexter plays student. And that failed experiment, time, she throws herself into the Trinity case through official channels, combing files, canvassing witnesses, and interrogating leads that the rest of Miami Metro barely understands. Deborah's approach to Trinity is the institutional mirror of Dexter's private obsession. While Dexter stalks Arthur Mitchell as a model for how to kill and keep a family, Deb is building a case to stop him as a serial killer with hundreds of victims. She listens to Lundy's theory about a 30-year cycle of murders, digs into cold cases, and begins to see the pattern that everyone else dismisses as coincidence. Her badge gives her one kind of access. Her pain gives her another. Lundy, in turn, embodies pure investigative fixation. He has no code like Harry's, no dark passenger to manage, only an almost ascetic devotion to the truth. Trinity is the one that got away, the killer whose ritual he has tracked across decades. When he returns to Miami, he is already dangerously close to the answer. A family man hiding in plain sight, using charity work and church projects as cover for ritualized murder. This would be the start of Lundy finally exposing Trinity, but the show cuts that arc short in a brutal pattern interrupt. Lundy and Deb are gunned down in a parking lot, an event that changed the emotional landscape of the season. Lundy dies with the truth half formed on his lips, his notes scattered, his profile unfinished. The man who insists on seeing too much is removed before he can say what he sees. Deborah survives, and that survival is its own tragedy. She is literally circling two serial killers, the ghost Lundy chased for decades, and the brother she loves and defends at every turn. Her instincts keep brushing against both. She questions why Dexter disappears, notices his lies, pushes him about Rita and his double life. Yet her emotional loyalty undercuts her investigative clarity. The part of her that hunts Trinity cannot imagine that the same pattern might apply inside her own family. In this way, Deb and Lundy form a different kind of mirror to Dexter and Trinity. They are people who run toward painful truths instead of away from them, who accept that seeing clearly will hurt. Dexter, by contrast, uses the language of control and the code to avoid real self-recognition. The long-term effects of that avoidance will not land until Deb finally discovers his secret in later seasons, retroactively transforming her season 4 arc into a rehearsal. She was always training to recognize monsters hiding in plain sight. She just never expected the next one to be sitting across from her at the family table. Deb was always learning to see monsters at work. With Trinity, we're going to dive deep into how monsters are made at home. Well, the aftermath of other men's choices. Harry stands beside a traumatized child and calmly explains how to get away with murder. He talks about forensic blind spots, disposal techniques, how to select victims who will not be missed. This would be the start of the code, presented as a lifeline instead of an indoctrination. Both men have justifications ready. Harry claims he is protecting Dexter and the world, channeling urges that are already there into a controlled pattern. Arthur claims he is teaching Jonah strength and responsibility, preparing him to survive a brutal world. In both cases, the father insists there is no real alternative. Therapy will not work. Vulnerability will not work. Only training the boy to kill or to live alongside killing can keep disaster at bay. The crucial difference is not in what they do, but in how Dexter narrates it. Watching Arthur force that gun into Jonah's hands, Dexter is horrified. He recognizes the cruelty, the violation, the way a parent is rewriting a child's inner life. Yet, Dexter never fully lets that recognition travel backward to Harry. He clings to the belief that Harry had no choice, that the dark passenger was an immutable fact, not an event that changed direction when Harry decided to weaponize it. Harry discovered a broken child and chose to build a careful killer instead of demanding real help from anyone outside his control. Arthur discovers a frightened son and chooses to manufacture a killer's hardness in him. Dexter can condemn Arthur's choice only by admitting Harry's was a choice as well, and that is exactly what he cannot allow. Admitting the parallel would mean that the code is not a moral shield, but a rationalization, that his entire foundation is compromised. The long-term effects of that denial will only become fully visible when Trinity finally reaches Dexter's own home, and the question of what fathers create stops being theoretical. When Trinity finally steps across the boundary into Dexter's home, the mirror stops being abstract. This is no longer about a theoretical future. It is about a man who already lives the life Dexter thinks he wants, bringing that corruption into the space Dexter believes he can keep safe. Let's kick things off with the cracks that show up behind Arthur's front door. In public, Arthur Mitchell is the gentle church volunteer, the grieving man who builds houses for others. At home, the mask slips. He screams at Jonah over a minor mistake, slams him into a wall, and radiates the same terror Dexter once saw in Harry's eyes, in that blood-filled shipping container. Later, he corners his daughter in her room, voice low but venomous, maybe even a version of Harry's code. This is where we're going to dive deep into Dexter's rationalization. Rather than reading Arthur's volatility as the natural endpoint of a life built on domination and murder, Dexter treats each outburst as an exception. The violent shove becomes a momentary lapse. The terrified wife is in denial. The messy kill is a fluke in an otherwise admirable career. Dexter tells himself he can extract the useful lessons and discard the rest, as if the cruelty is not the engine driving Arthur's entire ritual. Underneath that denial is the sunk cost fallacy, operating on a psychological level. By this stage, Dexter has invested time, risk, and emotional energy into believing Arthur has the answers. He has lied to Rita, misled the police, and allowed a known killer to keep hunting new victims, all for the promise of a blueprint for balancing murder and domestic life. To walk away now would mean admitting that every one of those choices served a fantasy. Here's the pattern interrupt. Dexter could still end this cleanly. He has Arthur on his table more than once in this season, metaphorically and literally, with enough knowledge to kill him and reassess his own life. But he does not. Killing Trinity too early would mean conceding that Harry's code did not prepare him, that his dark passenger chose the wrong teacher. The long-term effects of clinging to that lie will only become clear when Arthur's chaos collides directly with Rita, and the mirror Dexter keeps refusing to face finally shatters. Arthur's chaos finally collides with Dexter in the most mundane place imaginable. A suburban garage. No ritual altar, no plastic wrap, just tools, lawn equipment, and the quiet realization that both men are predators hiding in plain sight. This is an event that changed how clearly Dexter could have seen himself and how completely he chose not to. Let's kick things off with the moment Dexter drops the mask. Up to this point, he has played the eager acolyte, the clumsy Kyle Butler, trying to earn Arthur's trust. In the garage, that performance ends. Dexter corners him, voice low, posture controlled, and calmly states that he knows about the cycles, the bathtub, the jumpers, the hammer. He does not accuse Trinity,
as a horrified outsider. He speaks with the precision of someone who has discovered a peer. The truth in his tone is unmistakable. This is a fellow killer stepping out of the shadows.
Arthur's reaction moves in chilling stages. First, pure fear. The decades-long secret career. The carefully curated image of church volunteer and family man, all suddenly at risk. Then, recognition. Arthur studies Dexter's calm, the way Dexter does not flinch when describing the victims. Finally, a twisted This garage conversation is the closest Dexter comes to fully seeing himself in Arthur. Two men, surrounded by children's bikes and paint cans, calmly discussing how they kill. No masks, no aliases, no nervous jokes, just the shared language of ritual, selection, and justification. If Dexter looked directly at this mirror, he would see that the same logic that keeps Trinity killing is the logic he uses to tuck his own murders into a narrative of control and protection. Instead, this would be the start of a deadly kind of hope. Rather than taking Arthur as a warning sign of where his choices lead, Dexter treats the encounter as confirmation that his world is wider, that there are others like him who can balance family and murder. That fragile sense of belonging blinds him. He leaves that garage not determined to dismantle Arthur's life, but still clinging to the fantasy that he can learn from him. The long-term effects of that denial will only become clear when Arthur's pattern reaches Rita and the domestic space Dexter thought he could keep separate from his dark passenger becomes the final crime scene. Dexter leaves that garage believing he can still harvest the best parts of Arthur's life and discard the rest. But under that confidence, something far more dangerous is growing: envy. Not just fear of becoming Trinity, but a hunger for what Trinity appears to have mastered. Let's kick things off with Dexter's fascination with Arthur's longevity. Lundy frames Trinity as a ghost who's been killing for 3 decades, hundreds of victims, never caught, never even really suspected. Dexter doesn't recoil at that. He's impressed. Throughout his life, Dexter has measured success by how well the code keeps him hidden. Arthur is living proof that the dark passenger can be fed for a lifetime, while the world still sees a harmless church volunteer. That admiration deepens when Dexter watches Arthur with his family. At the breakfast table, Arthur laughs with his kids, kisses Sally, and leads Grace. Dexter stands in the doorway, not as a predator sizing up prey, but as a student watching a masterclass. The narration isn't about how to kill Arthur. It's about how Arthur manages to kill and still come home to a functioning household. Dexter has always feared that his urges would eventually poison Rita, Astor, and Cody. Arthur seems to have neutralized that threat. This is where Dexter's insecurities as a husband and father come into focus. He struggles with intimacy, misses milestones, and treats family events as cover for his double life. Harry's code never taught him how to be emotionally present, only how to avoid consequence. Perfect protector, perfect family man, is equally doomed. Harry's choice to build a code around control is suddenly on trial. And the next time Dexter watches Arthur with his family, the scene that unfolds will finally force him to see what he's been refusing to look at all along. The next scene doesn't just prove Dexter wrong about Trinity, it detonates the entire fantasy Dexter has built around himself. The bathroom kill is not a twist tacked onto the finale. It is the moment the mirror finally turns and points straight at him. Let's kick things off with the image. The season leaves, burned into the audience's memory. Rita in the bathtub, throat cut, water turned red, body slack against porcelain. The camera lingers on the blood-filled tub in a way that directly echoes Trinity's first-stage victims, the women he drowns in their own bathtubs. But it also reaches further back, past Arthur Mitchell, to Dexter's own origin. As that crimson water spreads, the show is restaging the shipping container, the floor awash in Laura Moser's blood, where young Dexter sat screaming while Harry discovered him. Throughout his life, Dexter has tried to turn that childhood scene into a controlled ritual, a kill room, plastic, a knife over a carefully chosen target. In his mind, those kills are a way to master the chaos of that first trauma. But Trinity's murder of Rita is not just random cruelty. Arthur unconsciously forces Dexter into the role that destroyed his own life, the failed protector father who could not save his family from blood. Arthur's ritual is built around replaying his family catastrophe, the mother in the bathtub, the sister pushed, the father bludgeoned. Dexter has spent the season stalking Trinity as a dark mentor, hoping to learn how to balance family and the dark passenger. Instead, Trinity teaches him, Beta collapsing their traumas together. Rita becomes Dexter's Laura Moser, killed off-screen while Dexter chases the illusion of control. Then comes the pattern interrupt that reframes the entire series. Baby Harrison on the bathroom floor, sitting in his mother's blood, crying. The framing is almost identical to the flashbacks of young Dexter in the shipping container. Same overhead angle, same small body in a sea of red. In one shot, the show fuses past and present, turning Harrison into Dexter and Dexter into Harry, the man who walks in too late and finds a child reborn in violence. This is an event that changed Dexter's self-concept more than any discovery of his slide box or kill room. His belief that he can quarantine harm to bad people has finally collapsed. The consequences of his double life have spilled into his own home, onto his own child, the protector identity so central to Harry's code. Instead of ending Trinity when he has the chance, Dexter inserts himself into Arthur's life under an alias, eats at his table, meets his wife and kids, and even brings Arthur into his own orbit by revealing details about Rita and the children. This would be the start of a catastrophic overlap between two double lives. Throughout his life, Dexter believes Harry's code can fence off the dark passenger from the people he loves. Trinity is supposed to prove that belief right. Instead, every contact point increases the danger. Dexter underestimates Arthur's paranoia, misreads his volatility, and keeps prioritizing the fantasy of learning over the basic duty of protection. By the time Arthur discovers Dexter's real identity and tracks down his home, the conditions for Rita's death have been fully constructed by a long series of deliberate decisions. So when Arthur physically kills Rita, how responsible is Dexter? Legally, the answer is simple. Morally, the show pushes a harder truth. Dexter chooses not to follow the code's most important principle, never get caught, which really means never let the kills bleed into personal life. He ignores every warning sign, from Lundy's profile of Trinity's longevity to the terror in Arthur's own family, because admitting the danger would also mean admitting that the dream of being a husband, father, and serial killer is a lie. The consequences of that denial land directly on Rita's body. Dexter's reaction when he finds her is telling. Shock, grief, numb dissociation as Harrison sits in the blood. In his mind, this is an event that changed everything because Trinity did this to him. The framing is passive. He has been wounded. His family has been attacked. His world has been shattered. The narrative inside his head does not initially include the sentence, "My choices made this possible." The killer is external. The victim role, internal. But if Dexter had truly accepted Trinity as his mirror, the logic shifts. Trinity is not an aberration. He is the endpoint of the same urges, the same double life, the same compartmentalization. Seeing that clearly would have left only two honest options: kill Arthur quickly before he can ever touch the Morgans, or walk away from the entire family fantasy to keep them safe. He does neither. Rita doesn't die only because Trinity is a monster. She dies because Dexter refuses to admit he is the same kind of monster, living the same kind of lie. And that denial turns everyone who loves him into potential victims. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how that blood-soaked realization echoes through Dexter's that Rita is dead because of him. Yet the focus of his confession is not Rita's life or the children's trauma, but his own narrative collapsing. He talks about the dark passenger, about Harry, about the code. The language centers his identity as a killer who failed at control, not as a husband who failed to protect. Throughout his life, Dexter has used that inner voice to curate reality. After Rita's death, the narration keeps circling back to his fantasy of being a good monster. He remembers the wedding, the house, the kids, but the emphasis is on how those images made him feel human. The pain is real, but it is tightly bound to the loss of that self-image. The protector who could kill monsters like Trinity and still come home to a safe domestic world never existed. Now, Dexter has to face that, and he hates the feeling more than the fact of Rita's absence. There are flashes where genuine accountability almost breaks through. On the boat, he explicitly says, Rita died because of him. At the funeral, when he watches Aster and Cody, there's a moment where the camera lingers and the narration falls silent, as if the truth has finally been discovered. He did this by bringing Trinity into their lives and by underestimating what a monster like that could do. But then the familiar defenses slam back into place. He blames fate, the dark passenger, the inevitability of his urges, anything that keeps him from saying, without qualifiers, that this was his choice. This tension between grief and self-pity is the core of the aftermath. Dexter is in agony, yet so much of that agony is about losing control of his story. This would be the start of a new phase where every loss is filtered through that same lens. And the clearest sign he still hasn't really looked into the Trinity mirror is simple. Even standing in Rita's blood, Dexter can't fully admit he is the one who put her there. The next phase of his life will show just how dangerous that denial becomes when Deborah steps into the blast radius. Standing in Rita's blood, Dexter makes a quiet but devastating psychological move. He doesn't turn toward Trinity in his mind. He turns back to Harry. And that split between Harry's ghost and Arthur's shadow is what will keep him from ever truly accepting what he has become. Throughout his life, Harry has been more than a memory. He is an internalized voice, a full hallucination that walks, talks, argues, and justifies. Harry appears in the passenger seat, in the kill room, in empty hallways, offering guidance on who to kill and how to avoid getting caught. He judges Dexter's slip-ups. In that pool of blood, he is remembering Arthur's ritual, Arthur's family, Arthur's lie of domestic safety. Those images operate like a second silent voice, competing with Harry's code every time Dexter considers another kill. We're going to dive deep into how that competition plays out. In Season 5, with Lumen, Harry's ghost frames the partnership as a controlled extension of the code. But Arthur's shadow is in the room whenever Dexter hesitates, knowing that Trinity also believed he could compartmentalize his urges and still protect his family. In Season 7 and 8, when Deborah learns the truth and begins to crumble, the flashbacks to Rita and to Trinity's house underline that Dexter has already seen this trajectory. Trinity's wife and children were the preview. Deborah and Harrison are the sequel. Here's the pattern interrupt. Harry is the story Dexter wants to believe about his life. But Arthur is the story he's terrified might already be true. Harry promises that the code can manage the consequences. Arthur proves that the consequences always escape. Every time Dexter listens to Harry's ghost instead of Arthur's shadow, he is choosing the comforting script over the bloody mirror image. And that ongoing choice to keep Harry's voice loud and Arthur's presence blurred is how Dexter continues to avoid the mirror, even after it has already drawn blood. The next phase of his story will show what happens when other people start hearing the echoes of both voices too. That tension between Harry's comforting script and Arthur's bloody mirror leads into one of the most dangerous ideas the series plays with, the myth of the good serial killer. Throughout his life, Dexter has been framed as a dark hero, a man who kills only those who deserve it, follows a strict code, and channels his urges into a twisted form of justice. This is the good serial killer trope. The killer as vigilante, the monster as protector, the predator whose victims are framed as worse than him. It offers a moral loophole that lets the audience root for a man who dismembers people on plastic. Let's kick things off with how the show builds that fantasy. Harry's code tells Dexter to only kill confirmed killers, to never get caught, and to blend into ordinary life. As a blood spatter analyst, devoted brother, and later husband and father, Dexter looks like the controlled alternative to chaos. The dark passenger becomes almost a tool, something he can aim. Harry's lessons, repeated as internal narration, reassure viewers that there is a line, and Dexter is on the right side of it. But Season 4 quietly asks a dangerous question. What actually separates that fantasy from an obvious villain like Trinity? On the surface, Arthur Mitchell is the balance, killing, and family. It becomes clear that the mechanisms keeping both men going are the same: denial, compartmentalization, and the belief that control can erase consequences. Arthur tells himself that his murders are a doomed act of penance. Dexter tells himself that his victims are a public service. Both narratives protect the killer, not the world. Once Trinity is in the frame, we're going to dive deep into an uncomfortable recognition. If Arthur is monstrous precisely because he hides behind family and ritual to keep killing, then Dexter's life begins to look like the same pattern with better lighting. The more the parallels stack up, the harder it is to maintain the illusion that Dexter is fundamentally safer or morally different, and the next stage of the story will show what happens when that illusion finally meets a consequence that even Harry's code cannot explain away. If Trinity exposes the illusion that Dexter is morally different, the people around both men expose another illusion that no one ever noticed. The series quietly shows that almost everyone closest to Dexter and Arthur discovered fragments of the truth. They just could not or would not assemble the full picture until it was too late. Let's kick things off with Rita. Throughout his life with her, Dexter treats domestic routines as camouflage, but Rita feels the gaps. She calls out his sudden disappearances, the late nights with flimsy work excuses, the way he goes blank when real intimacy approaches, when Dexter vanishes on their honeymoon because he is chasing a kill. Rita confronts the emotional distance, asking why he keeps shutting her out. She notices the lies, the locked boxes, the way his reactions never quite match the moment. She does not know about the dark passenger, but she senses that her husband's interior life is far more violent and inaccessible than he admits. Deb carries a deeper, more primal version of that intuition. From the pilot onward, she jokes that Dexter is a robot, that he does not feel like other people. Underneath the banter is a recurring awareness that something is off, that his urges and silences do not align with the gentle blood analyst persona. Deb is repeatedly drawn to men with secrets, Brian, who literally shares Dexter's origin in blood, Lundy, whose obsession with the Trinity case mirrors Dexter's own hunt, even Quinn, who starts to suspect Dexter is hiding major crimes. This would be the start of a tragic pattern where Deb's search for partners who understand danger keeps circling the one person whose danger she cannot name. In parallel, the Mitchell family lives with Arthur's volatility of that denial in later sections. But the key parallel is stark. 2 suburban households, 2 predators at the center, and circles of loved ones who almost see the whole monster. The tragedy is not that no one noticed. It is that everyone noticed just enough to be haunted, yet not enough to stop the final kill. And the moment one of those households finally tears the mask off will trigger an event that changes Dexter's life and exposes just how lethal his own illusion of control has always been. When Trinity finally steps into Dexter's orbit, the illusion that a code can keep a monster contained starts to crack on both sides of the mirror. Harry's rules and Arthur's rituals look like opposite philosophies, but the long-term effects of each leave almost identical wreckage. Let's kick things off with Harry. Throughout his life as a cop, Harry watched the legal system fail real victims and responded by building a private workaround, a code that let Dexter kill, as long as the targets were guilty and Dexter never got caught. On paper, that sounded like protection for Dexter, for Miami, even for Deb. In practice, it created a highly skilled, untraceable serial killer embedded inside the justice system itself. The consequences ripple outward. Dexter's double life means every relationship is founded on a lie, which turns basic love into long-term psychological warfare. Rita marries a man she never truly knows, raises children in a house, hiding a blood slide box, and ultimately pays with her life when Trinity slips through Dexter's net. Deb spends seasons brushing up against the truth, internalizing the chaos as her own failure, until her trauma culminates in panic attacks, moral breakdowns, and finally her death as a direct byproduct of Dexter's world. Even the institution Harry wanted to correct becomes corrupted. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation turns into a cover-up, with Doakes framed, LaGuardia killed, and the public narrative permanently poisoned. Now, cut to Arthur Mitchell. On the surface, his code is religious rather than forensic. He believes each cycle of 3 kills, plus the hidden 4th, atones for his childhood trauma and maintains a twisted spiritual order. For over 30 years, that ritual leaves hundreds of victims scattered across states, a ghost pattern only someone like Lundy can see. Arthur sells it as penance, as control, as a way to keep the dark passenger from exploding into random chaos. Inside his home, the truth looks very different. His family lives in constant terror. A wife frozen by fear, a daughter surveilled and humiliated, a son beaten into submission. Jonah's eventual breakdown, when he finally lashes out and tries to kill his father, exactly as designed, and the cost is everyone who never agreed to live under them. And that brings us back to the one person in Trinity's orbit who actually tries to do what Dexter never does: step off the path. Jonah Mitchell is the pattern interrupt inside Arthur's nightmare, the abused son who looks at the legacy in front of him and for a moment decides he would rather die than become it. Let's kick things off with Jonah's return in Season 6, long after Trinity's exposed and Rita is dead. Throughout his life, Jonah has been forced into Arthur's script: the smiling church kid, the helpful son, the one who silently absorbs the rage that never reaches the public facade. When Dexter tracks him down in Nebraska, the facade is gone. His mother and sister are dead. His father's truth has been discovered, and Jonah is drowning in survivor's guilt. The show places him in a familiar Dexter position, standing at the crossroads between grief and homicidal urges. In Nebraska, we're going to dive deep into a crucial detail. Jonah has already attacked his abusive father once, beating him with a shovel in a desperate attempt to stop the cycle. Later, consumed by rage, he lashes out at his mother, contributing to her death. This would be the start of Jonah's own dark passenger, the terrifying realization that the same violence that ruled his childhood now lives inside him. But when Dexter confronts him in that empty store, knife ready, Jonah does something Dexter almost never does when the urge to kill surges. He begs to die instead of continuing the pattern. Jonah's breakdown is not framed as a clean redemption. He has harmed people. He has lied. He has contemplated suicide. Yet his actions represent a genuine attempt to break the cycle of abuse and violence. Even if he falters, rather than perfecting Arthur's ritual, he wants it to end with him. The long-term effects of Trinity's horror are written across Jonah's body language, his hunched posture, his shaking voice, but so is the possibility of refusal. He chooses confession over concealment, accountability over a private code. Now place that beside Dexter, who has multiple crystal-clear exits from his own pattern. After Rita's death, Dexter stands in the blood of his wife and his son, confronted with an event that changed his entire mythology of being a protector. Later, when Deb learns the truth and literally walks into a kill in progress, Dexter faces another crossroads. Each time, he considers walking away from killing, from Harry's code, from the dark passenger narrative that lets him frame murder as necessity. And each Deborah discovers that Harry didn't just bend the law to protect victims. He broke it in the most intimate way possible. He found a child with urges to kill and built a code around those urges, actively creating a careful serial killer under his own roof. That revelation is an event that changed her entire origin story. Her father is no longer the noble detective. He is the architect of the monster standing beside her at crime scenes. Season 4 quietly primes this collapse. While Dexter is chasing Trinity, Deb is already digging into Harry's past and uncovering his affairs with Laura Moser and other women. Each new secret chips away at the saintly image she carried since childhood. Harry, the devoted family man, was cheating on Doris, lying to his kids, and running a second emotional life in the shadows. The long-term effects of those discoveries are subtle at first, but they set a pattern. The man she trusted most is not who she thought, and the system he embodied is built on compromise and concealment. When Deborah finally learns Dexter's full truth, that groundwork turns into a psychological collapse. It is not just that Dexter kills, it is that Harry knew, trained him, and then left Deb alone with the aftermath. The two men who defined her life, her moral compass, and her closest bond were living double lives right beside her, bringing her into crime scenes, family dinners, and shared grief while hiding a private world of bloodslides and ritual kills. Her breakdown is not over a single revelation. It is the compounded betrayal of realizing that every major choice she made as a cop and as a sister was entangled with a lie. This is where the Trinity mirror comes back. Deborah's experience begins to resemble the Mitchell family's trajectory. Just like Sally, Jonah, and Rebecca discovered that Arthur's church-going facade masked a serial killer reenacting his own trauma, Deb discovers that her father figure and her brother were monsters curated by a code. The normal life she thought she had, Sunday dinners, shared cases, the proud legacy of a cop family, was, like the Mitchell household, a stage set built over hidden bodies. The domestic space itself becomes contaminated. We're going to dive deep into how that contamination leads Deborah to a moral crisis that feels like the emotional sequel to the Trinity arc. Because if Trinity forced Dexter to glance at the mirror, Deb is the one who ends up staring into it. And the next phase of her story asks a question Dexter keeps dodging. Once the truth is discovered, what kind of life is even possible? Season 4 is where every pressure in Dexter's life stops being theoretical and becomes urgent. A newborn child, an official marriage, a legendary serial killer, never get caught, protect the innocent family on the side. Season 4 systematically attacks that belief. The newborn keeps him sleep-deprived and sloppy. The marriage creates obligations he cannot schedule around his kills. Lundy's investigation raises the risk of exposure. And Trinity's escalating pattern puts innocent victims in the crosshairs, including Rita and the kids, whether Dexter admits it or not. This would be the start of a perfect storm designed to force self-examination. Dexter watches Arthur reenact his childhood trauma over and over, realizing that this is not a curse from a mystical dark passenger, but a series of choices repeated until they calcify into ritual. He sees Arthur terrorize his own family, rule by fear, and hide behind ritualized guilt and religion. In response, Dexter briefly toys with real change. After witnessing one of Trinity's murders, he considers giving up killing altogether, or at least walking away from the hunt. There are moments where he looks at Harrison and wonders if the cycle can stop with him. But every time, the pattern snaps back. Instead of quitting, Dexter reframes Trinity as a mentor, someone who can teach him how to balance killing and domestic life. Instead of confessing anything to Rita or Deb, he doubles down on lies. The supposed epiphany becomes a justification to refine the code, not abandon it. Trinity's existence functions as a narrative intervention, the universe handing Dexter a case study in his own future. Arthur is what happens when a man spends decades insisting his violence is separate from his role as protector. The long-term effects of that denial are written all over Arthur's broken family. By the end of season 4, With Rita dead in the bathtub and Harrison in blood, Dexter has been given all the information needed to see the truth. His decision to treat it as an anomaly, not a verdict, is what makes every later tragedy feel inevitable rather than accidental. And Deb is about to prove why. But before she can, Season 4 quietly detonates Dexter's favorite lie, the idea that the dark passenger is something riding him, not something he is. Throughout his life, Dexter has narrated that presence like a demon in the backseat, a hitchhiker that Harry taught him to manage with the code. Let's kick things off with that long-standing habit. From the pilot onward, Dexter talks about the dark passenger as an it. It wakes up. It demands blood. It gets hungry when he sees victims walk free. That language creates distance. The urges to kill are framed as an external force, while Dexter presents whether the dark passenger is just a story he tells himself to live with the truth that he enjoys the kill. Those flashes are short, but they matter. They reveal that some part of him has discovered the narrative is breaking down. Arthur Mitchell, meanwhile, never uses a passenger metaphor. He talks about God, sin, and punishment, but he does not claim an inner demon made him do it. His ritual is framed as a choice to reenact his own trauma under a religious code. He prays, he confesses, he begs forgiveness, yet he still walks into each kill, fully aware of what his hands are doing. In a twisted way, Trinity takes more explicit ownership of his compulsion than Dexter does. That's the real mirror. Dexter's dark passenger myth is his version of Arthur's God story, a way to shift responsibility onto something abstract. Season 4 is where that story stops fully working. The consequences have become too personal, the pattern too obvious. Dexter may not admit it yet, but the audience has seen the verdict written in blood, and Deb is about to drag that verdict into the open. But before she does, Trinity has already delivered a different kind of judgment on Dexter's deepest fantasy. Trinity doesn't just scare Dexter as a tactical problem. He terrifies him as a possible future. Let's kick things off with comparison. Throughout his life, Dexter has faced enemies who threatened specific pillars of his identity. Brian targets his loyalty, offering a life where the dark passenger is worshipped and the code is discarded. Miguel Prado tempts his ego, praising Dexter as a righteous avenger and turning Harry's rules into a political weapon. Doakes threatens his freedom, the only major antagonist whose primary power is seeing through the mask and refusing to be manipulated. Each one pushes on a different fault line: family, morality, exposure. Trinity is the first to threaten all three at once. Arthur Mitchell is a family man, a devout church volunteer, a decades-long undetected killer whose ritual is built on childhood trauma. In other words, he is living Dexter's long-term dream. Same double life, more experience, higher body count. When Dexter stalks Arthur, not to kill him, but to learn from him, this would be the start of a truly disturbing dynamic. He is not just hunting a monster. He is auditioning a mentor. We're going to dive deep into why that realization curdles into fear. Early on, Dexter watches Arthur with his family and expresses genuine awe. Here's a man who has been killing for 30 years, who still has a wife, children, a house, a respected role in the community. Normal are right in front of him. And even then, Dexter's first instinct is not to reject the model, but to imagine doing it better. That is what makes Trinity uniquely horrifying. In the end, Trinity terrifies Dexter, not because he is an opposite, but because he is more advanced in the same direction, a perfected version of Dexter's lie. The real horror is that Dexter only fully understands this after Rita's death, when it is far too late to claim he did not see the pattern. And as Deb starts pulling at those same threads, the question becomes unavoidable. How many more Arthur Mitchells is Dexter willing to become before someone finally stops him? Rita is where Dexter's fantasy of control collides with a reality he cannot manage. Trinity shows Dexter the endgame of that lie, but Rita is the test case, the place where the double life actually has to function day after day, diaper after diaper, kill after kill. Let's kick things off with how Rita enters Dexter's life. On the surface, she is a perfect cover, a gentle, traumatized woman who has survived an abusive marriage and is too overwhelmed with her own pain and 2 kids to look too closely at Dexter's secrets. Dexter even admits that her damage makes her ideal because she will not demand sex, emotional intimacy, or time he wants to reserve for stalking victims. Throughout his life, he has been trained by Harry to see relationships as camouflage, not commitments. But this would be the start of something Harry never prepared him for. Over seasons 2 and 3, Rita quietly stops being a prop and becomes an emotional anchor. She offers unconditional trust, defends Dexter to everyone, and believes completely in the gentle, slightly awkward blood spatter analyst who reads bedtime stories. When she discovers his fake drug addiction, she does not run. She sets boundaries and asks him to get help. The mask accidentally receives real love, and that love begins to reshape the man behind it. That is exactly where the conflict explodes. On one side, late-night feedings, school events, and mounting bills. On the other, an escalating need to kill and maintain Harry's code. Dexter sneaks out between family obligations to stalk, prepares kill rooms after birthday parties, and lies about overtime to cover blood on his clothes. The logistics are almost comic, but the emotional strain is not. Every minute he spends rocking a crying baby is a minute he is not tracking a predator, and every hunt risks blowing up the fragile stability Rita has built. Then Trinity enters as a pattern interrupt. Here is a man who has done this for decades, with a wife, kids, a house, and a church community that adore him. Dexter does not just hunt Arthur Mitchell. He's the audience that has been rooting for him. Throughout his life on screen, the series has trained viewers to inhabit Dexter's head, and Season 4 turns that training against us. Let's kick things off with the way the show's point of view works. From the pilot, Dexter's voiceover is our guide, our interpreter of every scene, every kill, every moral line he crosses. His dark humor about blood spatter, his wry comments about victims, the way he frames Harry's code as a necessary response to failed justice. All of that invites shared rationalization. When Dexter jokes about the dark passenger needing to stretch its legs, the narrative style makes that language feel almost practical, an internal management system rather than a confession of compulsion. Trinity, by contrast, is introduced through horror grammar, low, ominous music, long, lingering shots on his rituals, terrified victims framed as prey, the bathtub scene with the woman's femoral artery, the rooftop jump, the staged bludgeoning of a father. Each ritual is shot like a nightmare viewers are meant to recoil from. Dexter's kills, meanwhile, are often presented with sleek plastic, calm monologues, and almost elegant staging. The camera glides around his kill rooms. The editing syncs with his voiceover. The tone leans toward precision rather than chaos. This contrast creates a powerful cognitive dissonance. Intellectually, everyone knows Dexter is a serial killer with dozens of victims, operating on a private code no court ever approved. Yet the show's alignment encourages a different emotional response. Trinity is monstrous. Dexter is controlled. Trinity is a predator. Dexter is a problem solver. The structural similarities, double life, ritual, origin trauma, self-justifying rules, are right there. But the aesthetic framing pushes viewers to feel that one is horror and the other is, somehow, a coping mechanism. Season 4 weaponizes that dissonance. At first, Dexter stalks Arthur Mitchell as a mentor figure, someone who has successfully balanced family and killing for decades. We're going to dive deep into how chilling that is, because the show lets the fantasy play out. Dexter breaks the code, inserts himself into Trinity's family, protects him from Lundy, all in service of preserving his own double life. The consequences are catastrophic. Lundy dead, Deborah wounded, Rita murdered, Harrison in blood. The voiceover rationalizations that once felt clever suddenly reveal their cost. In that moment, the narrative forces a hard question. Who enabled this? Dexter's denial is obvious, but the audience has been participating, encouraged by the POV to believe he could. A body going limp as blood blooms into the bath. That image fuses domestic safety with ritualized death, and it directly rhymes with Dexter's origin story in Blood and Water at the shipping container. Throughout his life, the defining trauma is being left in a pool of his mother's blood, and Season 4 keeps pulling that liquid memory into bathrooms, drains, and tiles. The finale makes that connection literal. Rita's body in the bathtub, Harrison crying on the bloody floor, is not only Trinity's signature, it is Dexter's childhood, recreated in his own home. The white bathroom tiles we have seen all season in Trinity's kills become the backdrop for Dexter's personal apocalypse, an event that changed every illusion he had about keeping his two lives separate. Parallel to the bathtubs, the season keeps pairing Dexter and Arthur in cleansing rituals. Arthur scrubbing blood from his hands, Dexter rinsing his knives, both men staring into mirrors after a kill. The cuts between them emphasize that the dark passenger is not some supernatural force. It is a habit, a ritual, a practiced way of washing away consequences. When Dexter watches Arthur at the public restroom sink, he is literally seeing his own future. An older man, hands shaking, still trying to rinse guilt down the drain. The backgrounds tell the same story. Family photos line Trinity's walls, just as framed pictures of Rita, Astor, Cody, and Harrison filled Dexter's house. Church iconography surrounds Arthur when he prays and when he plans his next kill, mirroring the way Harry's code functions as Dexter's private religion. Suburban exteriors, neatly mowed lawns, barbecues, Little League fields become the shared stage where both men hunt while pretending to protect. The message is clear. This is one world, not two. Some of the most chilling foreshadowing comes in the way scenes are framed. Dexter, holding Harrison at the beach, promising to be a better father, is shot with the same gentle, glowing light as Arthur holding his grandchildren at the build site. Both men cradle small children. Both smile like loving grandfathers or dads, and the score leans into tenderness. The long-term effects of those images are devastating once the truth is discovered. Every soft family moment has a hidden body behind it. Throughout the season, the camera keeps insisting on the Dexter Trinity mirror. It is Dexter, and at times, the audience, who refuses to fully see it, preferring the fantasy that the code makes him different. The real question is what happens when that visual denial can't hold anymore, and the next reflection he faces is even harder to escape. And that next reflection is brutal, because Season 4 is not an act of fate crashing Arthur, sabotaging family counseling, hiding the second apartment. Every time he chooses to protect the secret mission over honest communication, he pushes Rita and the kids further into blind vulnerability. They cannot defend themselves from a danger they do not even know exists, and Dexter keeps that ignorance in place on purpose. Then comes the most reckless decision, bringing Arthur to Miami. Instead of containing the threat, Dexter invites it home, inserting Trinity directly into his professional and domestic orbit. Arthur visits Miami Metro, stands in Dexter's neighborhood, meets his family under a false name. Each contact is another chance for Trinity to notice patterns, to feel insulted, to seek payback. The risk is not abstract. It is visibly escalating with every shared scene, and the audience can see the cause and effect chain tightening long before the bathtub. Dexter's final error is underestimating Arthur's capacity for revenge. Even after discovering the hidden abuse, the terrorized family, the rage under the religious facade, Dexter still treats Trinity as a puzzle to be solved on his terms. He assumes control, assumes superiority, assumes the dark passenger makes him uniquely disciplined. When Arthur discovers Dexter's identity and escapes, the outcome is not bad luck. It is the direct consequence of giving a vengeful, meticulous killer motive and access. What makes the mirror even clearer is that Trinity's life is also a sequence of choices. Arthur chooses to continue his ritual for decades. He chooses to reenact his trauma instead of seeking any form of help. He chooses to terrorize his wife and children while hiding behind church projects and charity. The show never frames him as possessed by a supernatural force. The horror lies in how ordinary his decisions look from the outside. So when Dexter blames the dark passenger or fate for Rita's death, the season quietly disagrees. The real mirror he refuses to look into is not just who he is, but what he chooses over and over, even when he knows better, and how the long-term effects of those choices finally burn through the fantasy of control. And that's exactly where Dexter, New Blood, picks up the thread, because the mirror Dexter refused to face in Trinity keeps reflecting back at him, even in Iron Lake. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated reinvention as escape. New name, new town, new job, same dark passenger. In New Blood, Jim Lindsay is just Dexter's latest costume, and the series makes that clear by circling right back to the themes. Season 4 cracked open. Fatherhood, legacy. The series keeps pulling us back to that bathroom floor, insisting that Dexter never stopped being haunted by Trinity. He just tried to bury that haunting under a new zip code. At the same time, Dexter's Iron Lake life echoes Arthur Mitchell in a different key. Trinity maintained a decades-long double life as a beloved church volunteer and family man while killing hundreds of victims. Dexter becomes the friendly clerk at the hunting store, dating the town's chief of police, integrated into a small community that trusts him completely. The surface details change, but the architecture is the same. A man who believes he can balance intimacy and murder if he just follows the right code and keeps his urges in check. New Blood is explicit, that this fantasy comes from the same denial that blinded him to Trinity's reality. Where the reflection gets most direct is in Harrison. We're going to dive deep into that parallel because Harrison's awareness of Dexter's true nature strongly recalls Jonah Mitchell facing Arthur. Both sons discover that the man who raised them is a killer. Both are torn between love and horror, between protecting others and protecting the only father they have. Jonah's confrontation with Arthur is soaked in rage and grief. Harrison's final standoff with Dexter carries the same emotional DNA, but now centered on the Bay Harbor butcher instead of Trinity. In the end, New Blood argues that even in a new town, under a new name, Dexter cannot outrun the questions Trinity raised. What kind of father can a serial killer be? What does it mean when a son sees the truth clearly and has to decide whether to kill, forgive, or walk away? The mirror from season 4 never shattered. It just waited in the shape of Harrison for Dexter to finally look. If Harrison is the mirror that waits, Trinity is the mirror Dexter could have faced and then acted on. Instead of treating Arthur as a puzzle to solve and a rival to kill, imagine Dexter actually accepting the truth in front of him. This is the moment where we're going to dive deep into the futures that never happened, the lives that might have been spared, and the long-term effects of a different choice. Let's kick things off with the most radical possibility that is still grounded in Dexter's psychology. Dexter infiltrates Arthur's home, sees the terror in Jonah's eyes, hears Sally's strangled attempts to keep the peace, and discovers the bruises, the broken doors, the constant dread. In canon, he files this away as evidence that Arthur is a monster who deserves to die. In an alternate path, he recognizes that this is not just Trinity's house. It is a preview of his own. The fear on Jonah's face becomes a vision of Cody, Astor's resentment, Harrison's confusion. For once, the protector fantasy, his capacity for domestic harm, might not cure him, but it could redirect where the damage lands. The ripple effects would be enormous. Rita and the kids either lose Dexter through a breakup or a staged disappearance, but they live. Deborah never walks into the church to see her brother kill Travis Marshall because Dexter has already stepped away from the badge and blade double life. Miami Metro keeps chasing the Bay Harbor butcher as an unsolved nightmare, but Lagerta never dies in a shipping container, and Batista never has to process that his trusted colleague was the monster in plain sight. The escalation that defines the later seasons simply never ignites. At the same time, this is not a magical redemption arc. Even with the mirror held directly to his face, Dexter is still a man shaped by Harry's code, by decades of rehearsed rationalizations, by a dark passenger he experiences as inevitable. Full reform is unlikely. But different choices about proximity to innocent people are not. He could become a drifter, predator, a ghost on the margins, directing his violence away from any home, any family, any Harrison. This isn't fan fiction for its own sake. It is a way of measuring the weight of the decision Dexter actually makes. To turn away from Trinity's mirror, to keep the family, keep the kills, and believe he can balance both. The tragedy of Rita, Deborah, Lagerta, and eventually Harrison's disillusionment grows out of that refusal. And in the next part, we're going to dive deep into how every person who discovers Dexter's truth ends up paying for that one moment where he could have changed course and didn't. That refusal sets up why the show needs Trinity, not just as an antagonist, but as an event that changed the entire narrative structure of Dexter's life. Up through season 3, the series is almost dangerously stable. Dexter has Harry's code, a reliable system, a growing family, and a comfortable rhythm of hunting victims at night and playing boyfriend, brother, and coworker by day. On paper, that rhythm could continue forever. The Bay Harbor Butcher crisis ends with Doakes framed, Lila dead, and Dexter's secret intact. By the time Miguel Prado is gone, Dexter has tested bringing someone into his world, seen it fail, and still landed back on his feet with Rita, the kids, and a baby on the way. The fantasy hardens. The dark passenger can be managed. The urges can be contained. The consequences can be minimized. From a storytelling perspective, that stability is a dead end. If the only question is, will Dexter get caught? The series becomes a procedural about maintaining a mask rather than evolving a conscience. So the writers escalate to learn how to kill for decades and still keep a family. Throughout his life, Dexter has believed Harry's code can let him have it all. Trinity seems like proof. But the longer Dexter embeds himself in Arthur's world, the more the mask slips. The family is terrified. The home is ruled by violence, and the supposed balance is just prolonged abuse. This is where the narrative stakes truly transform. Trinity embodies the internal contradiction at the heart of Dexter's life. The same man who claims to protect his family is the man who endangers them by keeping the dark passenger alive. Rita's death is not just a shocking twist. It is the logical outcome of that contradiction. The protector identity collapses. The manageable monster is exposed as a lie. In that sense, Trinity is less a villain of the week and more a structural tool. Season 4 uses him to shatter the fantasy that Dexter can forever control his urges, shield his loved ones, and escape consequences. From here on, every person who discovers Dexter's truth is living in the wreckage Trinity revealed, and the next sections are going to dive deep into how that fallout spreads through Deborah, Harrison, and everyone left standing. If Trinity is the wreckage, Season 4 is the blueprint showing how everyone's moral math leads there. To understand why Arthur becomes the mirror Dexter refuses to face, we're going to dive deep into the moral geometry that the season quietly lays out. 4 positions, all colliding, all failing in different ways. Let's kick things off with Harry's utilitarian code. Harry watches the justice system bleed out case after case and decides the only answer is controlled killing. The code says, kill only the guilty, never get caught, protect the innocent. It turns murder into a grim public service announcement. Throughout his life, Dexter treats that framework as proof that his urges can be repurposed into something almost noble, a compromise Harry sells as necessary triage when the law collapses. Dexter's own ethic is a mutation of that. He clings to the idea that the dark passenger is separate from his real self, so every kill becomes both compulsion and alleged mercy. Season 4 exposes how self-serving that is. Dexter stalks Trinity not just as a target, but as a mentor for how to keep killing while raising a family. He doesn't question whether vigilante murder is right. He questions only how to balance it with domestic life. The moral question becomes logistical, not ethical. Arthur's religious fatalism twists that even further. His ritual is built around reenacting his own trauma, but he frames every victim as particles in Arthur's private theology. When Dexter finally has him on the table, the scene plays like overdue cosmic correction. Yet the season keeps planting a darker idea. Dexter's existence enables similar tragedies. His obsession with learning from Trinity gives Arthur time to keep killing. His double life drags Rita and Harrison into the blast radius. Season 4 refuses easy answers. Harry's code, Arthur's rituals, Dexter's kills. Every moral shortcut claims to manage chaos and instead multiplies consequences. The true horror of Trinity is not only what he does, but how close his moral geometry is to Dexter's when the religious language is stripped away. The next section is going to dive deep into how that blurred line becomes inescapable. Once Deborah, Harrison, and everyone left behind have to live with what both men built. Trinity exposes that blurred line, but Dexter's reaction is not full awakening. It is controlled damage. Throughout his life, Dexter has lived by the belief that the code, the dark passenger, and his chosen victims keep him separate from the monsters he hunts. Trinity threatens that belief, not just by what he does, but by how familiar it all feels. Let's kick things off with the rare moments where Dexter actually admits that kinship. When he first tracks Arthur Mitchell, he does not see a simple target. He sees a model, a killer who has kept a family and a ritual going for decades. Dexter literally stalks him as a mentor, telling himself that Trinity has discovered how to balance killing and domestic life. Later, when Dexter stands in Arthur's attic kill room, surrounded by trophies and tools, he recognizes the shared compulsion, the double life, the ritual. Then he immediately adds the caveat. Arthur is different because Arthur kills innocents and Dexter only kills those who deserve it. That pattern is crucial. Each admission of similarity is immediately wrapped in a disclaimer. This is where psychological defense mechanisms quietly take over the narrative. Dexter compartmentalizes his life into airtight boxes: brother, father, blood analyst, and secret killer. The box labeled protector cannot coexist with the box labeled Trinity's mirror, so he keeps them separated by an elaborate internal filing system. Rationalization then steps in to glue the gaps, turning the code into a moral firewall that, in his mind, permanently divides him from his victims. We're going to dive deep into what full acceptance would actually demand. If Dexter truly believed that he and Trinity were the same, 3 options appear. He would have to stop killing entirely, betraying the core urges that Harry taught him to manage. He would have to confess, destroying the life he built and facing real conscious guilt, but never enough to see the whole unbearable picture. The question is, how long can a mirror stay cracked before it finally shatters, and who will be standing closest when it does? And that cracked reflection doesn't just belong to Dexter, it belongs to the audience. Throughout his life on screen, Dexter's violence has been framed as controlled, almost surgical, wrapped in Harry's code, and aimed at obviously guilty victims. Trinity tears that framing apart, and in doing so, exposes something uncomfortable about why this story is so compelling in the first place. Let's kick things off with a simple contrast. On paper, Dexter and Trinity are both serial killers with long careers and staggering body counts. Yet Dexter's ritual, kills in plastic-wrapped rooms, feel cleaner, more justified, more palatable. Trinity's murders, by comparison, are chaotic and intimate. Bathtub suicides, rooftop pushes, hammer blows in half-renovated homes. The violence is messier, but the real difference is narrative. Dexter's kills are guided by a code that promises moral clarity. Trinity's cycle is driven by trauma and rage that never resolves into a clear lesson. Fiction gives a safe arena to explore urges, fantasies, and fears that would be unthinkable in real life. A character like Dexter becomes a proxy for a desire to see simple solutions to complex problems. Bad people appear. The dark passenger awakens. The knife falls. And the world feels a little more balanced. The legal system that failed Harry is bypassed. The consequences are contained. And the story assures that only the guilty are discovered on the table. Trinity is a pattern interrupt to that comfort. His double life as a beloved church volunteer and family man shows how domestic normalcy can coexist with unimaginable horror. Scenes of Arthur Mitchell hugging his children or repairing a house land differently once the truth of his rituals is clear. The violence can no longer stay abstract, sealed in a kill room. It bleeds into breakfasts, car rides, and family vacations, making it harder to pretend that a killer can keep harm perfectly compartmentalized. This is where the mirror turns toward the audience. At what point does a sympathetic killer stop being sympathetic? Is it when innocent family members are directly targeted, as with Rita? When the performance of fatherhood and husbandhood is revealed as another tool of control? Or is it simply when the fantasy of clean consequences collapses, and the victims are no longer distant monsters, but people who could live next door? We're going to dive deep into that discomfort, because Trinity forces a question about thresholds never go away, and the visual blueprint the series keeps returning to. This would be the start of every rationalization, every rule in the code, every kill Dexter commits in the name of control. Throughout his life, Dexter tries to turn that helplessness into power. Harry's code teaches him to channel the urge to kill, to transform being a victim in a container into being a judge with a knife. The plastic-wrapped rooms, the blood slides, the careful rituals are all attempts to domesticate that original horror. Instead of drowning in blood, Dexter arranges it, studies it, owns it. The long-term effects of that choice are massive. A whole life built on the belief that if the urge is managed, the trauma is mastered. Then Trinity arrives with his own ritual. A woman in a bathtub, wrists slit, water turning red. Arthur Mitchell is reenacting his mother's suicide, just as obsessively as Dexter reenacts the shipping container. The bathroom becomes his container, tiled, confined, echoing with family tragedy. When Dexter studies Trinity's first-stage victims, the show is already aligning two origin stories, two men who believe they can keep replaying their worst moment without ever truly facing it. Rita's death is where those images fuse. Dexter comes home, hears the baby crying, follows the sound. Harrison is sitting in a pool of blood on the bathroom floor, mirroring young Dexter in the container. Rita lies dead in the bathtub, Trinity's ritual perfectly completed inside Dexter's home. The circle closes with surgical precision. The same composition, the same helpless child, the same absent protector. In that instant, every attempt to redirect the trauma collapses. Dexter has spent years believing that killing other predators would prevent his origin from repeating, that the code could convert harm into justice. Instead, the unprocessed wound simply recreates itself, untouched by how cleverly it was repurposed. The consequences are devastating because the truth is unavoidable. The pattern was never broken, only delayed. Trinity is the agent of that closure. He takes Dexter's origin image and reflects it back, forcing Dexter into the role Harry once held, the father who failed to protect. The man Dexter hunted as a monster becomes the mirror that shows what his life has produced. And once that loop has been drawn in blood, The question becomes, who else will be pulled into it next? Trinity draws the loop in blood, and in doing so, he exposes the one belief Dexter has never truly questioned, that he is in control. Throughout his life, Dexter has survived by treating his dark passenger like a problem that can be managed, scheduled, and contained. Let's kick things off with Dexter watches a killer who is not in control at all, yet still manages to keep going. That contradiction is terrifying because it points forward to what Dexter is becoming. Arthur also attacks Dexter's emotional defenses. He calls Dexter Kyle, drags him into family dinners, and uses confession and prayer as emotional manipulation, forcing Dexter to play along in a life that looks uncomfortably like his own. When Arthur targets Christine, then Deb and Lundy by proxy, the line between Dexter's hunting life and his personal life thins. And when Arthur discovers Dexter's real identity and reaches Miami, he makes the most direct move possible. He goes for Dexter's family. Rita's death is the moment the fantasy shatters. Dexter believed that by killing bad people, by following the code, he was protecting his family from the consequences of his urges. Instead, Rita ends up in a bathtub, her blood echoing Laura Moser, with Harrison in a pool of it on the floor. It is an event that changed everything because it proves the opposite of what Dexter has always told himself. No amount of planning can insulate innocent lives from his choices. Dexter's reaction reveals how deep the denial runs. He spirals briefly, questioning the dark passenger, wondering if he destroys everyone close to him. But almost immediately, he begins to reassert the old patterns, cleaning up, hiding evidence, returning to the code, as if better adherence will fix what was fundamentally exposed. Intellectually, he has discovered the limit of control. Behaviorally, he doubles down on the same system that failed. This would be the start of a long-term effects pattern that runs through the rest of his life. Trinity becomes pivotal, not just because he kills Rita, but because he demonstrates that there is no safe way to be what Dexter is trying to be. The code cannot firewall consequences forever. And once that truth is out in the open, the real question becomes who will recognize it next and what they will do when they finally see it. Once that truth is on the table, that the code cannot contain the fallout forever, we're going to dive deep into what Trinity really represents. Because Arthur Mitchell is not just Dexter's most dangerous opponent. He is the life Dexter is already living, stretched out to its logical, horrifying conclusion. Let's kick things off with the parallels. The show keeps hammering. Both men are born from childhood trauma, standing in rooms soaked in a parent's blood. Both grow into killers who ritualize that pain. Arthur's bathtubs, rooftops, and hammers echoing the night his family imploded. Dexter, the way Sally flinches at his voice and performs the role of loyal wife with dead eyes. Jonah's rage and terror boiling over when he smashes the Mustang, exposing years of abuse. Rita's growing unease as Dexter vanishes, lies, and loses time with the kids. Each of these is an event that changed the frame, a direct invitation for Dexter to see himself in Arthur and make a different choice. Instead, he treats them as anomalies in Arthur and exceptions in himself. Arthur is out of control, while Dexter is still learning. Arthur's family is weak, while Dexter's family is safe. The evidence keeps piling up that the pattern is the same, but Dexter's need to believe he is better, cleaner, or more honest with his darkness overrides the truth his own investigation has discovered. That refusal is not just denial, it is identity maintenance. If Dexter admits Trinity is a mirror, then Harry's code is not a moral firewall, it is a cosmetic filter. The dark passenger is not a separate entity to be managed. It is Dexter's own capacity for harm. Accepting that would mean accepting that his victims are not the only ones paying the price. So when Dexter finally kills Trinity, he believes he has destroyed the future he fears. The show immediately proves he has answered the question wrong. Rita's body in the bathtub, Harrison in the blood, is not just Trinity's final crime. It is the long-term effects of Dexter's choices crashing into his family. Trinity was never only a villain to be defeated. He was the warning Dexter refused to hear. And the consequences of that refusal will echo through every person who ever comes close to knowing what Dexter really is. Rita's body is where the metaphor stops being metaphor. It's the ledger finally written in actual blood. And when we're going to dive deep into the cost of Dexter's denial during the Trinity arc, the numbers are much higher than one wife in one bathtub. Let's kick things off with Trinity's final cycle itself. The woman in the bathtub, the jumper from the building, the bludgeoned father in the house under renovation. Each of those victims only exists because Dexter chooses to shadow Arthur Mitchell as a student instead of ending him the first night in that bathroom. Dexter watches the ritual, dissects the pattern, and lets the dark passenger treat Arthur like a case study. Every day he spends learning is another day Trinity continues to kill. Then there is Rita. Trinity only discovers Dexter's name because Dexter arrogantly confronts him in public, taunts him in his own garage, and believes the code will keep his two lives separate. That confrontation is an event that changed everything. Arthur follows the breadcrumb trail right to Miami Metro, right away. She loses Frank Lundy to Trinity's orbit, then loses Rita, then watches Dexter spiral. Miami Metro closes the Trinity case with a narrative built on lies, never knowing the Bay Harbor butcher was in the room the whole time. Files are stamped solved, but the truth is buried. The institution Harry once believed in is now structurally compromised by Dexter's presence. Evidence misdirected, connections never made, justice distorted around a killer on the payroll. What gets destroyed is not only bodies. Trust evaporates. Identities fracture. The line between protector and predator, between family man and monster, erodes until no one around Dexter can stand on clear moral ground. That is the real horror of the Dexter Trinity mirror. It isn't the body count alone. It is how one man's refusal to see himself clearly makes safety impossible for everyone within his reach, even long after Trinity is dead. That collapse of safety takes us to the core of what Dexter has been hiding behind from the very beginning, the stories he uses to explain himself. Throughout his life, Dexter treats the dark passenger and Harry's code as almost supernatural forces, as if the urges are an external entity and the rules are a sacred shield. Together, they let him believe he is a guided weapon, not an autonomous killer. Let's kick things off with the dark passenger. From the pilot onward, Dexter talks about it as if it is a separate presence riding along in his life, something that demands blood and forces his hand. That framing is powerful because it sounds like destiny, not choice. If the dark passenger drives, then Dexter can tell himself he is merely managing an inevitable hunger, not actively deciding to stalk, capture, and kill victims. Harry's code works the same way, but in moral language instead of supernatural language. The code promises that as long as Dexter only kills the guilty and never gets caught, his violence is not only contained, it is justified. Harry becomes a prophet of this private justice system, and Dexter clings to that script. This would be the start of a lifelong pattern where every kill is narrated as prevention, every body as a necessary consequence of an origin he never chose. Trinity exposes the limits of both stories. Arthur Mitchell has his own script, a religious ritual, a family trauma cycle, a belief that his murders are an uncontrollable curse. Dexter discovers a man who also blames a past wound and a private mythology while maintaining a double life as a loving husband and church volunteer. The horror is not that Trinity is alien. The horror is how familiar his self-justification sounds. Name of his denial, Rita's death, proves the consequences are real. And still, Dexter retreats back into the same narratives about what he has to do. So, as we're going to dive deep into the final stages of Dexter's downfall, the question hanging over every scene becomes unavoidable. When the mirror is right in front of someone, what does it take to finally make them look? And what happens to everyone else if they never do? So, when that mirror finally appears in the form of Arthur Mitchell, the tragedy is that Dexter does everything except actually look into it. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated the dark passenger as a separate entity, a burden he manages, a predator he can aim at the right victims. Trinity exposes the truth that has been hiding in plain sight. This is not a separate creature. This is Dexter's future, Dexter's present, and Dexter's denial made flesh. Across this breakdown, we're going to dive deep into how Trinity is not just an enemy to be hunted, but a reflection of what the code has always been training Dexter to become: a family man facade, a meticulous ritual, an origin trauma that never healed, only repeated. Arthur reenacts his mother's death in the bathtub, his sister's fall, his father's abuse. Dexter reenacts the shipping container in every kill room. The more these parallels line up, the harder it becomes to pretend that Harry's code saved Dexter from becoming Trinity, rather than refining him into a more efficient version. Looking back at Season 4 through this lens, certain scenes almost play like confession tapes. Dexter stalking Arthur as a mentor is not just tactical, it is aspirational. He wants to learn how to kill for decades and still keep a family. The baptism scene with Arthur standing beside Dexter as Harrison is welcomed into a faith community fuses two religions on screen, Arthur's church and Dexter's code. In that moment, the show quietly asks which belief system is actually governing Dexter's life, and how long that double worship can last. The pattern interrupt arrives with brutal clarity in the bathtub. Rita's death is not only an event that changed Dexter's life. It is the visual proof that his fantasy of being a protector is indistinguishable from Trinity's domestic destruction. The opening image of a woman's blood in water was always a prophecy. When Dexter lifts Harrison from that floor, mirroring his own rescue, the circle is complete. The long-term effects of that denial are written on the child's face. So, this is where the conversation opens up. When Season 4 first aired, did Trinity read as Dexter's mirror?